Hey everybody. So today we're looking at 1.1 use midpoint part 3. Real quick before we get into this though, today we're going to start with a warm up on what we were learning in our last lesson, which if you guys remember was on the distance formula. All right, so I'm going to have you guys go ahead and try this one out just to kind of refresh your memory on what we were doing here and see, how much you remember. And then we'll look over it together. Okay, so go ahead, take a minute, copy this down. I guess before I have you guys do it on your own, let me just kind of remind you of a few things. So this is asking us to find the length of segment AB. It's giving us the coordinates to those 2 points. All right, and if you remember, the whole point is to plug these coordinates into the distance formula, and we can actually figure out how long that segment is. All right, so where you want to start, and I'll get you started and then I'll have you do it, is if you guys remember labeling the points, I highly recommend. All right, remember these coordinates, or I call them points or ordered pairs, they have a bunch of different names. But remember that they're always listed as x comma y. Okay, this is my first x value, this is my first y value. So I would call this thing x1 and I would call this thing y1. Okay. This other next ordered pair is my second x value and my second y value. So this would be x2, this would be y2. Okay, plug those numbers into the distance formula and do your math and see what you get. Okay, I'll give you some time to do it. Go ahead. Okay, so hopefully you were able to try that out. Let's go ahead and do it together and we'll see how it went. All right, so you guys hopefully already did this, so I'm going to go through kind of quick. I'm using D for distance here, but we know the name of our segment, so I'm actually going to use segment AB. So segment AB equals square root of, and let's go ahead and plug all this mess in. All right, x2 minus x1, x2 is an 8, minus x1, 5, squared, plus doing the same thing with my y's, y2, which is a negative 2, minus y1, which is a 0 squared. Okay, something to just point out. Notice we didn't get any double negatives. Sometimes we will, though, right? If this was a negative 5 right here, we would have a double negative turn into a positive. Just kind of look out for that stuff. It's easy to mess it up. Okay, so from here, let's do a little bit of math and see what we get underneath our radical sign. Okay, I like to do both of these steps in one. So 8 minus 5 is 3. 3 squared, 3 times 3, 9. Okay, plus over here, negative 2 minus 0 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared, negative 2 times negative 2 is going to give us a positive 4. All right, something just to point out, whenever you square a number, you will always end up with a positive number, right? Because if I have a negative 2 and I square it, I'm multiplying it by another negative 2. Okay, negative times a negative is always a positive, and a positive number times a positive is always positive. So just a little reminder on that. Alrighty, so it looks like we basically have our answer here. We're getting that the segment AB is the square root of, looks like 13. And let's go one more step. If you have a calculator, try it out. Look for your square root button and type in 13. And it looks like we're getting a 3.60. So we're going to round this thing to 3.6. Okay, so this is maybe the nicest looking answer. Go ahead and add this to your notes if you didn't have it. But yeah, 3.6, that is how long our segment is. Cool, so that is what we did yesterday. Let's get into today. All right, so we're looking at what's called the midpoint. As always, make sure you get this title at the top of your paper, even above the warm-up we just did. And by the way, warm-ups, they're just a part of your notes. They're not a separate thing. Do it all on the same piece of paper. Okay, so go ahead and get this on top. Make sure to not forget that it's called part 3. All right, so it looks like, all of these lessons will always start out with a little bit of, definitions, terms, and stuff like that. So, yeah, I guess I'm going to start out with just giving you a second. Go ahead and copy down this slide here, and then we'll look it over, and I'll kind of explain what's going on here. So take a minute, copy this down. All right, so this is saying a midpoint or a segment bisector bisects a segment. Okay, so that's what both of those things do. They bisect a segment. Let's start with that word bisect. Okay, that's because that's really the big thing. When something is bisected, that is means it's cut into two equal halves or two congruent halves. We'll use the word congruent in this class instead of equals. All right, so you can see right here a midpoint. On this example, M is the midpoint of this, and I can tell that because it is bisecting this segment. It's cutting it into two congruent halves. I can tell that these two halves are congruent, by the way, because that's what these little symbols mean. You're going to see that a lot in this class. If you ever see two things that have a little line through them, they're telling you that those two things are the same length. They're congruent to one another. Okay, but down here, this is the shorthand of it telling us what I just described. This is saying that segment AM, which would be this segment right here, is congruent to segment MB. Okay, so that right there is the symbol for congruent, a little equal sign with a little squiggly line. You'll see that a lot in this class. So this is really good stuff here. Get used to some of these fundamentals here. Okay, when it comes to the segment bisector, this line right here would be considered a segment bisector. The reason why is because it is bisecting segment AB. Okay, I can tell that because I can see these little congruent bars through these. It's telling me that this thing's being cut into equal halves. Okay, bisected. All right, so start to get used to that word bisect. It shows up a lot. Okay, and yeah, I basically described what it says here. So yeah, that is some nice fundamentals right there. Some good words to know. Refer back to this if you need to. Okay, so, but here is what we're going to be using for the majority of this lesson, the midpoint formula. All right, so go ahead and copy this in your notes. Anytime I give something a full screen like this, or like I underline it twice, that usually means it's really important. In your notes, after you copy this, you might want to put a nice big box around it or something like that, just to kind of bring your eye back to it. So take a second, copy down the midpoint formula. Okay, so now that you've copied this down, let's just take a look. I guess first things first, what does this thing do? This formula helps us find the midpoint of a segment. All right, the coordinates to a midpoint. And remember, coordinates is, x comma y. All right, and that's why this thing has a comma right here. This is going to help us find the x value for our coordinate, and this is going to help us find the y value for our coordinate. All right, so this is one giant ordered pair here. Here's all we have to do. All we have to do is plug in the endpoints to the segment. So let me draw a quick example here. So say we had this segment here. Okay, so let's call it AB. All right, and what we're looking for is the midpoint of that segment. We'll call midpoint M usually. All right, to find the midpoint, we'll plug in the coordinates of these two endpoints of our segment. We'll plug in the coordinates for A and the coordinates for B. All right, the x values will be added together, divided by 2, and our y values will be added together, divided by 2, and we'll have the coordinates to the midpoint of this segment. Okay, so that's what this thing's all about. So let's try it out. All right, so we got some directions here. We have a little graph. Just like I was telling you guys before, when you go to draw these graphs on your piece of paper, which again, make sure you're writing all of this on a separate sheet of paper, as always. You can just draw yourself a really simple graph, x-axis, y-axis, put some little tick marks on it. Okay, maybe make it a little cleaner than what I'm doing here, but I don't need you to go nuts on these graphs. So when you go to do this, go ahead and draw it out, okay, and plot these points here, and we'll try this problem together. So take a minute, copy all this. Okay, so this is telling us that M is the midpoint of segment SR, which if we're looking at our graph, yeah, we can kind of see that. And it's asking us to find the coordinates for M. Okay, so what are the coordinates of this point right here? Well, we can find the coordinates of the midpoint by using the midpoint formula. All we need to do is plug in the coordinates for the two endpoints of our segment, and we'll get the midpoint. Okay, so let's go ahead and try it out. So first things first, just to get used to it, I will always do this if we have a new formula. Let's write the formula first, and then let's plug the numbers into it. Okay, I'm going to use M for midpoint. So midpoint equals, just a little reminder, x1 plus x2 over 2. Okay, comma, same thing with our y's, y1 plus y2 over 2. Oop, y. Okay, so there's our formula. Now we need to plug in our endpoints. They're written out here, but they won't always be. Sometimes you'll just have a graph and you'll need to actually find the coordinates. You guys remember we would go on the x-axis to +4, and then to the y-axis to the +2, we would get 4, 2. Sometimes you have to do that on your own. Okay, they already wrote them out, but I want to label these points. So real quick, let's off to the side, let's write out these points and let's label them so we get them in the right spots. All right, I'm going to do it up here. You can do it in a better spot on your notes, but I'm kind of out of room here. All right, so actually, now let's just put them underneath here. Why not? Okay, so S is at 4, 2, and R is at 1, -3. Which, by the way, we can see that we went to the right one, down 3. Okay, so let's label these. Here's my first X and first Y. Here's my second X, second Y. All right, now we know we will get these plugged into the right spots. And you'll see this is actually even easier than the distance formula because there's no square roots and all that stuff. All right, so let's plug them in. X1 plus X2. X1 is a 4 plus X2 is a 1 over 2. And Y1 plus Y2 over 2. Y1 is 2 plus Y2, which is -3 over 2. Okay, so now we just need to do a little bit of math and we'll have our coordinates to the midpoint of our segment, right? So let me see, I'm gonna scroll down. All right, so midpoint equals 4 plus 1, we got a 5 over 2. We'll deal with that maybe in a second. Over here, 2 plus -3. Just a little reminder, guys, when you ever have a plus and a minus sign side by side, you can basically ignore that plus sign. This is 2 minus 3. All right, and if you need to have a calculator to help you, if you're kind of iffy on this weird math, that's fine. But yeah, 2 minus 3, we're going to get a -1, right? So we got a -1 over 2. All right, and which, by the way, that negative, it applies to the whole fraction. We can think of this as a -1/2 now, just by the way. All right, and there are the coordinates to our graph. Real quick, let's actually turn these into decimals and see if it makes sense. Because right now it's a little weird, like where is 5/2 on the graph? That's kind of weird. Okay, so I'm actually going to divide these numbers. Again, grab your calculator, try it out. 5 divided by 2, or you can probably do it in your head. We're getting 2.5. So midpoint equals 2.5, comma, -1/2 I know is a 0.5. So negative, I'm going to write it as 0.5. Okay, so that I think is a better looking answer, though this wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but let's make them decimals. Okay, so 2.5 comma -0.5. Let's actually see if that's where this midpoint falls. All right, like I said before, let's check to make sure our answer makes sense. If I go to 2.5 on the X and then down to 0.5 on the Y, do I land at my midpoint? Okay, here's the origin, 0, 0. So I'm gonna go to the right 2.5 and then down 1/2, and yep, I land right on my midpoint. Okay, so you might be asking, why did we just look at the graph and find the midpoint? We could have probably seen, oh yeah, this looks like it's at 2.5 and down 1/2. We could have just got this answer from the beginning. You're kind of right, but we won't always be given a graph. So we need to know how to do this if they just give us points randomly and we're not provided a graph. Okay, so that's kind of why. Okay, so let's see where we're going. So kind of leading to what I was just saying, they're asking us to then find the midpoint of segment RS on this problem, and they're just giving us the endpoints. That's it. All right, and then there's a little bonus question. We'll get to that. Which quadrant does the midpoint lie on? We'll answer that at the end. Okay, so yeah, go ahead, take a minute, copy these directions. We'll try this together. All right, so let's try it out. The endpoints of RS, they're giving us the 2 endpoints. They're asking us to find the midpoint. And then again, we'll get to this question in a second. So yeah, we just need to plug in these points into the midpoint formula. All right, one more time, just to make sure we're starting to remember this thing, let's write out the midpoint formula. All right, so midpoint equals, if you guys remember, it's x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. All right, just like before, we want to make sure we're getting these numbers in the right spots. So real quick, let's label our numbers. I'm just going to do it right underneath here. So here's my first x and my first y. Here's my second x, second y. Okay, let's plug them in. Let's see what happens. So midpoint equals x1 is a -4 plus x2, 6 over 2. And same idea with my y values. Y1's a 4 plus y2, which is another 4 over 2. Okay, let's see what happens. Oops. Okay, so pretty simple math here, right? -4 plus 6. Remember, we can think of this, we can look at this in reverse. This is just 6 minus 4, right? 2. So we're getting 2 over 2. And then over here, 4 plus 4, we're getting an 8 over 2. Okay, this problem looks like these actually divide evenly. We don't even need a calculator. So it looks like we're getting a 1, 4. There is the midpoint to our segment. Okay, pretty easy stuff. Let's look at the bonus question. It's saying, which quadrant does the midpoint lie on? Which quadrant? Okay, if you guys remember, when it comes to graphs, it's broken into 4 quadrants. Let me just remind you, and this might not be a bad thing to write in your notes. Go ahead and just draw yourself a quick X and Y axis. All right, and here's how the quadrants are broken down. The first quadrant is in the top right. Okay, we use like a Roman numeral 1. Okay, and then it goes counterclockwise from there. So this would be the second quadrant, this would be the third, and this would be the fourth. Okay, so which quadrant did this lie on? Well, if this is at 1, 4, I know that means I'm going to the right 1 and up 4. It would land, somewhere here, and that would be in the first quadrant. Okay, so let's answer our little bonus question, and let's say quadrant 1. Okay, so yeah, quadrant's really simple. Just remember, start in the top right, go counterclockwise. All right, so I'm gonna have you guys go ahead and try one a lot like this. Go ahead and label your points, plug them into the midpoint formula, and see what you get for your midpoint. And then after that, tell me what quadrant is it gonna lie in. Okay, so go ahead, take a couple minutes, try it out. Okay, so the endpoints of RS are at -7, -5, -3, and 7. Find the midpoint. I think we've written out the midpoint formula enough. Let's go ahead and plug it right into it. All right, so midpoint equals, all right, and I remember I've started to memorize it. It's x1 plus x2. Real quick though, I forgot. Let's label our points. All right, let's not get too lazy here. So there's my first x, first y. There's my second x and my second y. Okay, so x1 plus x2. X1's a -7. Right, plus x2, -3 over 2. And then same thing with my y's. Y1, -5 plus y2, 7 over 2. All right, so yeah, let's go ahead and see what happens. So up top here, just, again, we have a positive and a negative side by side. We can kind of ignore that positive. This is really just -7 minus 3, or another way of thinking of it, if you ever have 2 negatives and you're adding them together, you're going to get a bigger negative number. Okay, so -7, -3 gives me -10 over 2. All right, -5 plus 7. Sometimes it's easier, again, to look at it in reverse. What's 7 minus 5? 2 over 2. All right, these divide evenly. That's nice. So we'll probably do this in our head. -10 divided by 2 gives me -5. 2 divided by 2, 1. And there is my midpoint. All right, here's the question, or here's the bonus question. What quadrant does -5, 1 fall in or lie on? All right, if I go back to my little graph here, -5, 1, that means we would go to -5 on our x-axis and then up to +1 on our y-axis. We would land right there, and it looks like that would be quadrant number 2. All right, So hopefully you got that bonus question right. If you didn't, go ahead and write it out. Quadrant 2. Or I guess we'll use the Roman numeral because we're fancy like that, right? I didn't spell that right. I put quadrant. Quadrant. I want to do like I don't even know what I want to do. Quadrant. Okay, sorry. All right, guys. So that's kind of that for this lesson. Pretty short and simple one. So yeah, that's kind of it for today. Let me know if you have questions on this. Again, we'll be doing an assignment on this most likely the next school day I see you. So yeah, have a good one, guys. I'll see you.